Should New Zealanders be being encouraged to conserve fuel use now?
The point that I've been making for the last couple of weeks is it certainly doesn't hurt for people to be conserving fuel if they don't need to be travelling or if there are ways for them to do that. Anything that we do now to conserve fuel is going to be helpful in the long run.
What more should the government be doing right now in terms of directing or advising New Zealanders?
There are some things that the government can do at the margins. They've been cracking down on public servants working from home. Well, actually, for thousands of people, that can be a legitimate response. Being more flexible in their work hours, allowing people to travel in off-peak times rather than peak times. These things can actually have a significant impact. So allowing someone to travel outside of peak time, they're still getting to their job, and this is something not just government but all employers can do, allow people to travel outside of peak times. Those sorts of things will make a difference. It seems to me, it seems to have changed quite a bit from the plan that's been sitting on the website for the last couple of years. To some extent, you can, I'll speak from experience here, to some extent you can always plan a hypothetical scenario. When it actually hits and the reality hits, you do need to be willing to change that. And so I'm not going to criticise the government for updating it based on the reality of the situation that they're facing now. Well, we're a month into this. Everybody would have loved to have seen this information earlier. They've got it out there now. Some of the information's out there now. The sooner they can get the rest of that information out there, the better.
What do you make of the Nationals really critical of Labour or ECA public information campaign or energy saving? They said it was ludicrous. They said you respected money. Tips that New Zealanders already know, and now they've launched their own sort of campaign to save fuel and save costs on fuel. Is it a bit hypocritical from Nationals?
It's amazing how the wheel of politics turns full circle relatively quickly these days. You'll note in my response here, I'm trying not to be unreasonable. I accept that we're in a very tricky situation and the government will be having to move at pace. I'm not going to criticise them when they're doing things that ultimately we would be doing if we were in government as well. I want them to move as quickly as they possibly can. I think the public want them to move as quickly as they possibly can. That's my main message, really. Do it as fast as you can, but I'm not going to be unreasonable about that.
MB had to update their fuel stocks 3 times yesterday. Is that a sign that that things are not going all together well behind the scenes?
I suspect one of the things the government are going to be doing right now, and certainly I'd be doing if I was sitting around the cabinet table, is vigorously testing the reliability of the information that we are getting, both as the public and that the government will be getting, on fuel security. So is the information that the government's getting stuff that they can really rely on?
Yeah, I mean, Shane Jones said today, they're having to, rely heavily on these fuel companies to be providing that accurate information. Do you think that we can trust them?
That's one of the things that I'd certainly be testing pretty vigorously if I was sitting around the cabinet table right at the moment.
Also a very clear message from the government that they're not interested in remote learning for kids. Would you take the same view or different?
I think that has to be a last port of call. We do want kids in school. We want kids in school as much as possible. It would be an absolute last port of call.
Should the Prime Minister be fronting the sorts of updates that we saw today?
Those are really questions for the government. I put what I thought were a very reasonable set of questions to the Prime Minister in question time this week, and he didn't answer any of them on the basis that they were going to be answering them today. We'll have some more questions for him next week. I hope that he will be, across all the detail of this, and able to answer that.
Do you think they have answered those questions, and do you have more confidence that they know what they're doing?
There are certainly still a lot more questions around how levels 3 and 4 are going to work. As I've said, I don't think it's unreasonable for them to consult on the practicalities of some of those things. I'd ask that they do that as quickly as possible.
Any thoughts on them not using the beehive there direct?
I think, let's be clear, there's an element of politics playing out here. The government are doing everything they can to try and distance themselves from anything that looks even remotely like the COVID-19 response. The reality is this is a much smaller crisis than the COVID-19 response. But just focus on doing the job. I think New Zealanders will realise that they are the government and they should just do the job.
Are you personally conserving any fuel yourself?
I'm driving an electric car, and I'm very fortunate to be in the position where I can drive an electric car. A lot of people are not. So, but we've made a concerted effort in our household over the last few years to transition away from fossil fuels and to get everything onto electric as much as we can. We still have a diesel car, but we don't really use it very much.
Can you move to COVID?
Yeah.
didn't you share advice that was found in the cabinet paper with your name on it about potential risks of double dose vaccine for teenagers?
Yeah. So just to give everyone a bit of an update on the timeline of that, there was, and I've only sort of refreshed my memory of this in the last 24 hours, there was a cabinet paper towards the end of March as part of a suite of cabinet papers that was about removing vaccine mandates and vaccine passes. And one of those cabinet papers referenced, the cabinet paper itself actually dealt with younger children, but there was reference to the technical advisory group's guidance on teenagers that was referenced in it. Now that technical advisory group advice never went to ministers at the time, but it was subsequently referenced in that March cabinet paper when the mandates were all being removed. It doesn't materially change what the Royal Commission found. It doesn't materially change, the concern at the time, which is that advice around myocarditis risk should have been presented to ministers when we were making those decisions around mandates and around requirements for that group of people.
But you've insisted you didn't know that advice.
There was a lot going on at the time, but we're talking about vaccines for kids or teenagers,
Yep.
and parents might be angry that they didn't hear about that advice at the time.
Yeah, I understand the anxiety about that as a parent myself. I totally do. The government never received the advice when those decisions were being made. It was subsequently referenced in a cabinet paper for that March decision, which was communicated immediately. Why the Ministry of Health didn't share that advice subsequently, that's really a question for the Ministry of Health. But we certainly shared the government's decisions within days of them being made.
You've insisted.
March, shouldn't you share that risk?
Well, the cabinet paper itself was slated for proactive release. Whether it was proactively released at the time, it was certainly approved by the government for proactive release. Yeah, there were, all of those 1 p.m. press conferences were fronted by a minister and a public health official. And I, certainly for the ones that I was fronting, always left the advice on, vaccine safety, health advice. I always left that to the relevant health officials at those meetings, and I think that was appropriate. I'm not a health practitioner. I think it was appropriate that we left that to the relevant health officials. No, not at all, not at all. I certainly would say that I was very disappointed they didn't provide us with the advice when we made that earlier set of decisions. But in communicating that advice in March, when the mandates and the requirements were being removed, updating public health guidance, I always left that to the relevant health officials.
Well, was a decision made?
This is that you've been aware of this advice all along. You weren't upfront about it with the Royal Commission or to the House, and that this is part of a cover-up. How do you respond to that?
He's just utterly wrong. And, Winston Peters basically is calling the Royal Commission liars, and I don't think that he's right. This is a Royal Commission. There are 2 Royal Commissions. First was appointed by Labor. The second was appointed by the government that Winston Peters is now part of. Both of them have made findings around vaccination that I fully support.
You've told us, though, and you told the Royal Commission that you never received this advice. And yes, you had. So how do you explain that?
We didn't receive the advice from the technical advisory group. As I said, it was referenced in a cabinet paper when the mandates were removed, but the advice itself never came to ministers.
Right, but you knew about it because it's in the cabinet paper.
Well, when the mandates were being removed, it was referenced in a cabinet paper, but we certainly weren't made aware of it at the time when we were making those relevant decisions.
But has it been misleading the way that you've characterised it since then? Because, it seems as if you've been saying that you didn't know.
Look, I didn't recall the existence of the cabinet paper in question, and had I done so, I might have added an extra word or two to what I said earlier, which was at the time the decisions were being made.
And was an active decision made not to share this information with the public?
Absolutely not. And actually, if you look at the cabinet paper, it said that the cabinet had approved to be proactively released.
And in hindsight, do you think that it should have been?
Absolutely. We tried to proactively release all of those cabinet papers. Now, I wasn't manually checking the website every day to make sure that they were going up. But when we made those decisions, when the cabinet and the ministers said, yes, this cabinet paper should be proactively released, was absolutely my expectation that it would be.
The flow on from that is that New Zealanders aren't going to be refreshing websites all the time to try and find proactively released documents. So isn't there therefore an onus on you to be communicating?
And we were answering questions on those proactively released documents every day. While members of the public weren't, I can assure you that many of you were, and we were being very rigorously questioned on all of those. Okay. Awesome. Thank you all for coming out to Taita. Nice to see you all out in the wild. Yeah. See you later.